Have you reached a point where your business is working on paper, but leading it feels heavier than it should? Things are steady, work is coming in, and from the outside, the business looks healthy, but internally, something feels out of sync. What I've seen in my own business and in the agencies I work with is that this heaviness doesn't show up because you're doing something wrong. It shows up because you've grown faster than the business has. Your skills have evolved, your clarity has sharpened, and your leadership has matured, but the business is still running on assumptions and structures from an earlier chapter. In other words, you've already moved forward, but the business hasn't caught up yet. And when a business is performing well enough, this mismatch is incredibly easy to miss. Change doesn't feel urgent because everything technically works, which makes it very easy to keep operating in patterns that no longer support where you're trying to go. This is where drift happens. It's not a dramatic, obvious drift, but the quiet kind that feels practical, familiar, even reasonable. In this episode, we map out what's actually happening underneath that feeling. You'll learn how to spot drift early, what causes it, and how to shift your operating patterns so the business aligns with the direction you want to grow. If you've been sensing that quiet gap between where you want to go and how your business still operates, this will bring clarity to what's happening underneath and what's ready to shift. Here we go. Welcome to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you want to grow an agency to 7 figures and beyond without working more hours in your business, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Audrey Joy Kwan. I know what it takes to build an agency, including supporting an agency owner in selling and exiting. I also have a master's degree in communications, specializing in organizational development. My team and I have worked behind the scenes of multiple 7-figure agencies and have coached and consulted with over 150 agency owners. All this to say, when you join us on the Small But Mighty Agency podcast, you get real world experience and practical tips that help you work less, earn more, and lead with integrity. So let's go. Hey friends, if you've been following the series from the beginning, there's a good chance something feels clearer now than it did before. You might recognize yourself in the Small But Mighty Agency identity. You might understand why the old growth model, the one built on more clients, more services, and constant expansion, never quite fit, even when parts of it worked. And after the last blog post, you can likely see that there is a viable alternative, not just an idea or a vague philosophy, but a system, a way of intentionally building an agency around specialization, aligned products, clear outcomes, lived experiences, and strategic partnerships. And yet there's a moment that often follows clarity that doesn't get talked about very much. It's the moment after the insight lands. That pause can feel surprisingly uncomfortable because once you see a different way of building, you're no longer wrestling with uncertainty. You're sitting with a quieter question: what now? Understanding a model and actually choosing to build around it are two very different things. In the phase that happens after clarity, nothing drastic changes right away, but something internally shifts. Agency owners at this point aren't trying to overhaul their entire business overnight. They're simply seeing the work of their clients and their decisions with more precision than before. You're starting to get sharper about your positioning. You're clearer on the type of clients you actually want to work with. And you're noticing which projects energizes you versus which ones just keep the machine running. I know you're not sitting there thinking, I want fewer clients. You're thinking, I want better fit clients. Clients who recognize your expertise faster. Clients who value depth. Clients who don't need to be convinced of the basics. And underneath that is a deeper shift in belief. You're starting to question the idea that growth has to come from constantly adding more, like more services or more complexity just to maintain momentum. You've lived that version of growth already, and you know how heavy it becomes to sustain. Instead, you're drawn to the idea of building a business that's recognized, trusted, and sustainable over time. Not louder, not busier, but known for something specific. Clarity at this stage is mostly internal. You haven't redesigned your offers yet. You haven't rebuilt your pricing. You haven't mapped a full product ladder or partnership ecosystem. What you have is a growing awareness. This current way of growing works, but it feels heavier than it should. So the business continues operating as it always has. You still say yes to opportunities that are good enough, but don't feel right. You still customize to match incoming demand, and you still rely on chance rather than deliberate design, because structural change rarely happens the moment clarity arrives. Clarity comes first, design decisions come later. And this quiet middle phase, where insight has landed but the business hasn't been intentionally redesigned yet, is where many experienced agency owners actually are. Your thinking has evolved, but the business is still operating the way it always has. And that gap creates tension. When I start working with agency owners at this stage, this is usually what's happening. They have more clarity about their positioning and have a stronger sense of the clients they want. They can even articulate the kind of work that actually strengthens their agency instead of just sustaining it. But day to day decisions are still being made using old patterns. The pipeline still includes work that is close enough instead of aligned. Services are still fully customized. Opportunities are still evaluated based on immediate revenue, not long term fit. This isn't a strategy issue, it's a transition phase because the current way of operating is familiar. It's what kept the business stable, it's what paid the bills. So even with new clarity, you keep defaulting to what you already know. If you're in this phase, you're not resisting change, you're navigating uncertainty. Letting go of old patterns doesn't feel strategic in the moment, it feels risky, especially when the business is already performing reasonably well on paper. So instead of making a clean shift, something more subtle happens. You stay in between. You start seeing your ideal direction more clearly, but you continue operating in ways that is built for an earlier version of the business. You want deeper, better fit clients, but you still say yes to projects that keep momentum going. You want to be brought into higher level thinking, but parts of your offer are still structured around execution because that's what's historically sold. This is what drift actually looks like in a service business. It doesn't feel careless, it feels practical, responsible even. But over time, staying in old patterns while holding new clarity creates friction. The business keeps pulling toward familiarity even when your strategic thinking is pointing somewhere more focused. And slowly the work becomes heavier to sustain. At some point, the tension stops being about clarity and starts being about decision. Not big dramatic decisions, but small repeated ones. Which projects you say yes to and how you frame your offers, or what you prioritize when a new opportunity shows up. This is usually where you realize something important. Understanding a better way of building is one thing, running the business differently is another. Because the moment you start filtering decisions differently, the business begins to feel different. You look at fit instead of just feasibility. You start asking, does this strengthen what we're known for instead of just, can we deliver this? And the shift can feel uncomfortable at first, not because the direction is wrong, but because you're interrupting decision patterns that have been in place for years. What changes is the filter behind decisions. When you're choosing work that reinforces your positioning, your outcomes, and your long-term direction. Over time, this changes the quality of opportunities that come in. Clients arrive with more context, conversations start at a higher level, and you spend less energy constantly re-explaining what you do and where you add the most value. There's less context switching or customization just to make something fit, and less internal friction around misaligned work. The workload may still be full, but it feels more coherent. And when it's more coherent, effort starts stacking instead of scattering. Your positioning becomes clear in the market, your outcomes become easier to articulate, your reputation builds in a more consistent direction. And because decisions are reinforcing each other, growth begins to feel more stable, more grounded. This phase, the space between clarity and intentional redesign, is where many of my clients actually are when we begin working together. They're in a transition phase. They're experienced and they've already built something that works, but they can feel that their current model requires more effort to sustain than it should. They're ready for sharper positioning, more aligned offers, better fit clients, and a business that is known for something specific instead of stretched across everything. The work at this stage is not about blowing up the business. It's about realignment, looking at how the agency currently operates and gradually adjusting decisions, structure, and focus so the business reflects the clarity. Because once design catches up to clarity, the business stops feeling like something you constantly have to manage and hold together. It starts behaving more like something intentional and sustainable over time. This is why the work becomes less about insight and more about leadership, more specifically internal leadership. Because once you see your business more clearly, you can't fully operate the same way without noticing the friction. You notice the type of work that stretches you in the wrong direction. You notice where your time is going. You notice how certain decisions shape the future of the agency. And that awareness changes how you lead. You become less reactive, more deliberate, less driven by urgency and more guided by direction. Nothing looks dramatically different from the outside at first, but internally, your standards are shifting. What you tolerate, what you prioritize, what you want the business to be known for, that's the real shift. It's a recalibration of how you lead. And that's what we work on, your leadership. And one more thing, I want to be very clear that you evolve through integration. You don't wake up one day and redesign everything. You refine how you think, then how you decide, then how the business operates, layer by layer, because you're not building from scratch. You're reshaping something that already works. You have clients, revenue, reputation, and history. So the goal is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's alignment. This is why this phase can feel slower than you like, even when it's deeply productive. Externally, the business may look the same, but internally, the direction is becoming clearer. And once clarity and structure begin to align, the agency stops feeling like something you constantly have to hold together. It starts feeling more stable, more intentional, and more sustainable to lead. And that's what the small but mighty agency identity is really about. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me at the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app and share it with a friend. I'll see you on the next one.